Welcome to the Business of Travel, the official podcast of the Global Business Travel Association. My name is Steven Van Overmeiren. I chair the GBTA Accommodations Committee, and it's my pleasure to host today's podcast. This is the second in a podcast series brought to you by the Accommodations Committee, focused on everyone's favorite topic, the hotel sourcing season. If you haven't had a chance to listen to the first podcast, we encourage you to do so. For today's episode, we'll discuss a recap of the 2023 sourcing season, one of the most challenging and complex in recent memory, as both buyers and suppliers wrestled with the idea of a new baseline. For many, this represented the first normal sourcing activity in a post-pandemic environment. I'm very excited to introduce our dynamic panelists for this discussion. They all represent organizations which work with large numbers of both buyers and suppliers and are well placed to discuss trends and hot topics emerging from the most recent season. I'll ask them each to introduce themselves, starting with Pauline.
Hi, I'm Pauline Robin. I'm working for RoomIt by CVT, and I'm managing the hotel consulting team globally for CVT.
Thanks, Pauline. Lukasz?
Hello, everybody. My name is Lukasz Dabrowski, representing HRS Group. My role is anything global supplier related. So in charge of global supplier relations, I am also very happy to be part of the GBTA's Global Accommodations Committee, as well as the ALC chapter, so Allied Leadership Council. Delighted to be here today.
And David.
Hi, I'm David Mollov. I'm with TRIPBAM, and I'm responsible for hotel solutions, particularly the smart sourcing product, and supplier relations for TRIPBAM.
Excellent. Thank you so much to all of you for being with us today. David, let's start with the 30,000-foot view. Can you give us a recap of the 2023 season from your perspective?
Sure, Stephen. It was quite a ride. We know that when we talked to our buyers back in the late part of the summer, that we recommended, waiting until later in the season because, and if everybody remembers, there was a lot of questions around the economic certainty, and there was a lot of focus on a recession that was going to happen at some point in time, and there were midterm elections and all kinds of things that were going to drive the opportunity to potentially be more of a buyer's market than it ended up being. What we found was programs started definitely later. Pricing was in the low double digits increasing. There's a lot of acrimony between buyers and suppliers on some of the prices that came through. And at the end of the day, I think a lot of it's still kind of lingering on into the first quarter of the year.
Perfect. Thanks, David. Pauline or Lukasz, how about from either of your perspectives?
I would agree. I would be aligned with what has just been said. It's been quite a year. The expectations were worse than what we have seen in the end. We had, a lot of conversations with our suppliers that predicted incredible increases. It hasn't been as bad. We have seen increases, but not as bad as initially expected. We did the same thing. We proposed our clients to wait a little bit longer before starting the negotiation process. So it did start later than it does usually. And in the end, we ended up with increases that are way more reasonable than what expected. So, yeah.
Pauline, I can certainly echo your comments. Yes, I think the complexity of the situation was really based out of the fact that there were several factors contributing to increases. So it wasn't your regular supply and demand game. It was felt across the entire industry, and I can only mention factors like labor shortages. Obviously, replacing such a high number of staff has led to certain capacity limits on the supply end, perhaps even reduction in services and therefore higher rates. Same time, the other factor of the rising inflation, I think that's something that we will continue to be seeing in 2023. Then the high operating costs, I think the actual total have risen to well over 55% of annual turnover before rents. That is the highest level for the last 15 years. So obviously, while costs can be limited by reducing services, the only other driver is the rate. So those three factors are extremely powerful. And then on top of that, you've got that massive surge in demand with leisure absolutely booming, and corporate travel coming back in style, right? So also thinking of longer stays, increasing the average from 3 nights in 2021 to nearly 8 in the course of last year. So combined, altogether, yes, an exciting time to say the least.
We dug into the numbers a little bit to get a sense of what the story is, because when we talked to suppliers about, the increases, what we found was the story was the same. Now, sometimes, that is the case, and I think that certainly was the case here. Other times when everyone says the exact same thing, it almost feels like it's been rehearsed. We looked in to see what the labor situation was, and there is definitely a lot of truth to that. From December 2021 to 2022, and then from 2022 to 2023, the highest category of increase of cost for labor was the hotel industry. In 2022 was actually second highest to nursing, but the important thing to note was that argument held true in terms of it was really important that that hotels realize that they need to cover these incremental costs to be able to deliver the same product and certainly satisfy their obligations. What we did find, though, and this was something that was reported by STR in January, was that increases in average rate were about 13.5%, while occupancy was down 5%. And so if you put those two things together, it leads to about an 8.1% increase in RevPAR. What that says to me is they certainly, have a right to be able to ask for more in terms of ADR, particularly in the corporate segment where they didn't do much to rates in the last 2 years. However, it feels like there was a little bit of over rotation in this cycle. And then, I guess the real question that we've been asking suppliers is that, are we done now? Or is this something that we're going to see going forward into the next year as well?
And David, on that topic, any insight as to what we should expect as we continue into the future?
I haven't gotten enough of a crystal ball to be able to say specifically, but I do think that a lot of this was driven by correction after the pandemic. And it doesn't feel like there should be as strong a need to increase prices into the next season as there is the last season. Inflation is starting to tame. Certainly the segment is starting to, completely staff up. I think the real question is there going to be a dip in 2023? And if there is any kind of dip, what will that have impact on terms of demand?
Excellent. Yeah, I know for many buyers, it was an opportunity to hopefully set some kind of a new baseline. Obviously, not a lot of great data and not a lot of travel activity over the past couple of years, which certainly played into many negotiations. I'm curious, you guys all work with many corporate customers. Did you see anybody use any particular strategies this sourcing season that were successful in helping them to at least mitigate some of the increases that the market was pressuring for?
So on my side, and back to what David just said, there's so much uncertainty. We don't know if the rates are going up or down or a mix of everything. So what our clients have been pushing for is static rates as opposed to dynamic rates. And that's where the conversation was difficult, because this is exactly the opposite thing that the suppliers were pushing for. Clients want to protect their costs, and the static rates is the best thing. So what they have done to also convince the other side was to limit the number of hotels in a given location. So less hotels per location, build very strong relationships, push all their shares, all their volume into less hotels, and negotiate the best static rate. So that has been the negotiation. And when hotels refuse to do that, some clients have been open to, introduce alternative hotels, something that we haven't seen as much in the past. So I would say that's the strategy I have seen most of the time this year.
Can most certainly echo that. I think, overall, whenever there is pressure, there is also a great inspiration for creativity, for change, right? And pressure is obvious. I think I like this quote from CPO Rising 2022, the data revolution, saying in 1 year's time, the percentage of CPOs that prioritize savings has nearly doubled. So that is from 22% in 2021 to almost 38% in 2022. Now, the reaction to that and the inspiration or creativity behind how to tackle that problem is obviously a big talking point. And we've actually tasked ourselves with breaking down the various different savings elements in terms of levers. And we can differentiate here between savings that are the result of the cost pressure. So priority drivers here would be this very stringent cost management, ongoing restructuring projects to drive to increase the actual value for money. Second, anything related to savings, but from an availability standpoint. So for selected destinations, definitely prioritizing the importance of availability rather than the focus on price. And last but not least, a very interesting trend to Pauline's point, working with less but more relevant supplier base. And what I mean by this is not just for transients. This was an inspiration for a lot of customers that we work with to go in the direction of convergence. So really looking at transient, long stay meetings and groups, and selecting the supply participants accordingly based on their levels of understanding, preparedness, and readiness to basically embrace that bundled business, which creates a win-win scenario at the end of the day. So I would say one of those successful strategies has definitely been it.
Lucas, it's interesting. We were talking to buyers and suppliers about some of that, which is like the changing of the way that people are thinking of travel. Because, if anything, and hopefully we've all learned something from what happened in the last few years, things are not going to necessarily be the same that they were. We are seeing, things like leisure and business starting to bleed into each other, all kinds of buzzwords coming out of it. We've heard that from Wall Street and certainly what the CEOs of the major companies are saying. One thing we're thinking about, though, is, okay, well, if patterns are changing and the need for travel is changing and the almost the return on investment in travel is changing, then is it time to really think about the way we contract travel and the way we come to agreements in travel and evaluate it? Because very easily, and this is what worries me the most, is that we're going to fall back into old habits and start doing things the way we used to, what we used to complain about before the pandemic, and start thinking about more innovative ways to actually do this project.
Fully agree, David. I can only echo that. I welcome all kinds of innovation, optimization, automation of the process. I think that's also one of GBTA's leading initiatives moving forward. That has just gained a lot more supporters based on that experience of 2022 procurement season. I think we really need to work together to make sure that we are not falling back to the old habits, because we simply know that they don't represent a valid solution moving forward. The expectations are changing, the demographics of the customers are changing, and the experience that is expected is a whole new level.
Yeah, and Pauline, you said something that kind of resonated with me about dynamic and static, and the thing that I I've heard about is this pendulum between one and the other. And the thing that we've been talking to buyers about, and I'm curious what you're doing, is it's really about a mixture of the two. Because at the end of the day, it's not like rates are going up, go static. Rates are going to be going down, go dynamic. We had the dual rate phenomenon that was in place for a couple of years, and that I haven't heard from anybody in a while, and that's probably because it doesn't make sense for the supplier community. But at the same time, I think strategies need to kind of evolve and think about pricing that goes along with it. Because if you look at what goes into that GBTA form, there's still lots of questions that are really not necessary anymore. And I think it's about time to kind of rethink some of that. But, what do you think in terms of pricing strategy?
So in terms of pricing strategy, and the questionnaires on the GBTA list is definitely something else that we can discuss that can clearly be cleaned up. But in terms of pricing strategy, we are a TMC, and we do negotiate on behalf of our clients, right? So we do have access to dynamic rates that are, pre-negotiated. So what we tell our clients, what we offer to our clients is to have them negotiate static rates. And when the public rates are actually going down, they can use their TMC rates. So that's where they can, take an advantage of both situations. And back to your point, I haven't heard any supplier willing to do the same thing as what they did during the pandemic, where they offered dual rates. I think it has been super hard for them to manage, and that's not proposed anymore. So that's our way to support our clients, preventing them from increasing their cost or limiting their cost at least.
Mm-hmm. Lukasz, I'm curious if you're seeing something similar in terms of static versus dynamic rates. I think, sort of pre-pandemic, there was a relatively small share of buyers, myself included, who had already moved to a dynamic rate structure, pursuing other benefits, notably the ability to eliminate the annual RFP process. But it seems like, we saw some movement to dynamic during the pandemic, but now sort of shifting back the other way. Are you seeing the same at HRS?
Most certainly so. So it's been picking up as a hot topic, obviously, because initially this was pulled in two different directions. And obviously the suppliers identifying dynamic pricing as the answer in this sort of more volatile world of mixed demand, and the customers still insisting on having something that they can take to the bank. And I think the difficulty that most of the customers experienced was based on that surge in the overall demand. And also, I have to say, the corporate customers were also affected by what was happening on the leisure side, because for some of the many popular destinations, the actual deficit of available accommodations was a daily fact. So your dynamic offering, if it was at 15% off 250, it tomorrow could have been at the same 15%, but off 500. And that is obviously not something that helps with the corporate forecasting and cost control. Dynamic with cap at some point was also a big discussion point, but again, making sure that there is a spending cap on a rate when the rate doesn't have any availability anymore is creating the problem on the other side of the spectrum. So it becomes an availability issue, and therefore a risk of going out of program increases. So bottom line from my perspective is, some things have not changed that much, and the principle of insisting on fixed last room availability rates is still a fact for top destinations, highly used destinations of most customers that we work with, while where that footprint in terms of room night contribution is smaller, lower, there is a full openness to work with dynamic offerings as much controlled as possible, so as much predictable as possible. That's what we have been seeing.
It's interesting as you say that. I think about some of the challenges the industry still has on the buy side, which is the gap between the needs of the traveler and the needs of the corporation. A lot of the travel buyers that we speak with are responsible for managing spend on behalf of a large, contingency of travelers. However, when the individual traveler needs to go to a destination for whatever business reason, whether the price goes up $10, $20, $50 is irrelevant to that one traveler as they're thinking of their budget. But of course, when that gets magnified across thousands of travelers, that ends up becoming real money for the organization. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about some of these pricing scenarios and the way we do these things, I think what's tough is the buyer, needs to be able to exert control over the travel decision However, recognizing the fact that it's really hard to do so because travelers have their own needs. Until that's solved, I think there's going to be a hard time giving a buyer, all the tools that they can use to. It'd be really hard for the buyer to be able to, have all the authority on their organization to be able to control and spend as much as they'd like to.
Totally, David. I think all of those topics are interlinked. We like to talk about the so-called 5S framework, which is a representation of those buyers' priorities in the procurement exercise. So obviously the dimensions of savings, satisfaction, sustainability, security, safety. But the trick is basically to see it in a specific constellation and also be able to explain certain trade-offs, right? If we increase that pressure on the savings dimension, it may mean a knock-on effect on the other components of the strategy, right? And you've touched upon the topic of satisfaction, which I think is actually also extending and growing in terms of definition, right? I kind of remember associating satisfaction, traveler satisfaction, with the simple parameters of cancellation policies, the sort of on-site experience of flawless check-in, check-outs, often virtual. Then payment acceptance is now built into this, especially for virtual credit cards, a major compliance booster, and also a huge satisfaction component for travelers. And last but not least, we're seeing stuff like shared spaces, places to comfortably work in the room. So during those extended stays, the definition of satisfaction expands. And all of a sudden, it goes into dimensions that have not been considered or measured as part of satisfaction before. Major opportunity, in my humble opinion. But the key is to really understand and try to put a finger on what element of satisfaction can make a real difference in the planning. So this constellation of the 5S priorities is a super exciting exercise of 2022 and beyond, because things have become a lot more dynamic.
Is sustainability the 6S?
Absolutely, it's one of the 5. So savings, satisfaction, sustainability, security, and safety. Yep, it's there.
Yeah, I like it. No, back to what you said, David. That's interesting because, to your point, the travel manager has an objective, and the number one objective most of the time is actually cost limitation. The other thing, so the thing is, you want your travelers to use your content. So the number one thing is give the right content, offer the right content to your traveler, because if they don't book in your preferred booking channel, you lose it all. And that's the one thing you want to avoid as a travel manager, I would say. But the other thing to look at beyond what has been discussed already is also rate caps. I had a discussion with my team recently, and we realized that sometimes the rate caps were not, reviewed, and travelers had no choice but just book outside the channel because everything was rejected and they just had no option in the location they were trying to target. So that's another element that needs to be looked at as well, in addition to the rest.
Well, and that's kind of an interesting point, Pauline, because, the data exists, right? I mean, a lot of this information that was hard to come by is information that you can have. Like we know what retail prices are in particular markets, so caps can be updated. We know what, what the opportunities are for, providing content in pretty much in every market. And certainly, things like reshopping can guarantee that people will always get the best price, and as it relates to the volatility in pricing. So, at the end of the day, I think innovation has an opportunity to really push forward some of the old challenges that some of the travel buyers have had to experience over the years.
No question. 100%. No question. And innovation also to make sure that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Luca.
No, please continue, Pauline.
I lost my train of thought. Go ahead.
Then let me jump in. Speaking of innovation in this particular area, I think one of the things that we have experimented with over the course of the recent years and has proven to be a huge success as far as the innovative answer to this volatile, dynamic demand, frequent changes, project relocations, offices opening up, shutting down, and the need for instant offer, that would be something that can be measured, that would be basically traced for value, has been the extensive use of a closed user group program, let's say the equivalent of a consortia program, but one that we have built taking into account the sort of the ceiling of best available rates and the floor of net negotiated rates. So providing that additional dimension of transparency to customers in terms of the actual profitability tunnel that they have set upon in their procurement strategy. So it's one of the new initiatives, but something that helps to understand the actual balance of value in this dynamically changing environment, and represents let's say, an instant answer to those seeking a valid offer that is not a fixed negotiated rate that they would have to wait for another 9 to 10 months to finalize.
Lukasz and Pauline, what do you guys think of NLRA? One thing we encountered a lot, particularly from particular countries in Southeast Asia, was a lot of NLRA. And NLRA always, to me, felt like asking somebody out on a date and then coming back and saying to you, sure, I'll go out with you, but if I can find something better than you, I'll go out with them. It feels to me like an anachronistic way of doing business and not necessarily a partner-focused one.
I agree. And I would say, what is important, if you really want, as a buyer, if you really want to understand the situation, is it a good deal or is it not a good deal? When we speak about NLRA, what does that really mean? And I think that's where we speak about innovation. This is where we speak about data. This is where we speak about technology, the capability to really, monitor and observe the partnership to see if the hotel is, most of the time just not available to you when you need them. That's an interesting insight. And that's where you need to say, as a buyer, let's find something else. Let's build a different relationship either with you or with the different hotels that we may have. To me, that's the only way to really check, because even when we speak about LRA, we never know if that's the case in reality. So monitoring, to me, is the answer if we want to have some kind of certainty that the deal is working for you as a company.
I agree.
I can only echo that. Absolutely. I also agree with your definition, David. I think it's spot on. And I honestly believe that, again, wearing my customer-centric hat, the real use case for non-last room availability is less and less these days. We are serious about, loyal long-term relationships, and obviously everybody's seeking that. And LRA is just this kind of convenient backdoor that is pointing to, I might need you today, I may not need you tomorrow, which is always a bad message to be put in front of the customer seeking that understanding and longer term commitment.
So I'd like to circle back to a topic that was mentioned a bit earlier by several of you, which is around sustainability and the other factors to decision making outside of cost, which was certainly the key pressure in this most recent season. Across your client bases, are you seeing any kind of shift toward actual decision making on sustainability, or are we still focused on gathering of data and sort of nice to have tick the box exercises, or are you starting to see that shift toward decision making?
No, I would say that before or during the pandemic, everybody was speaking about that as a new trend. And now, looking at the current situation where costs are going up, travel managers are just going back to cost, and maybe traveler satisfaction, because people don't see each other as before, so travel becomes more important on an HR point of view. I would say sustainability is just slower. The interest in sustainability is slower than we expected initially, or I expected initially. And then the other thing I would add, and that's something we discussed yesterday, is that I believe that the clients are different. The regions are behaving in a different way. Coming from Europe myself, I would say that maybe in Europe, travel buyers are more focusing on the subject of sustainability than outside Europe, I would say. But that's my impression, my personal impression.
I would agree with that. I think the interesting thing about sustainability is it feels like it's still in information gathering mode, but at the same time, to put managing the impact to footprint on a travel buyer seems like a really difficult task to do when there's a lot of focus on cost as well. And I think what needs to happen for sustainability to be more of an impact, to be impacted, we need some more resource to do that. Europe, I think, is a great example in terms of making uncomfortable decisions around flights versus trains. In the United States, we don't have the same, dynamic with rail, but at the same time, if we want to be more sustainable, it's going to have to be uncomfortable for somebody. And unfortunately, that's the reality of making change happen. I think everybody has to get their heads around that and kind of move from information gathering to actually making decisions. It's just hard to do.
Yeah, we in our experience, we're privileged to be working with some of the customers who have actually spearheaded the focus on sustainability as one of the decision-making criteria already in the course of this season. So I can say it was a truly enlightening experience in terms of that we already have large corporate organizations tasking themselves with a very ambitious goal of basically getting there far earlier than others. I can also say, obviously, not all of the customers are the same level of preparedness, and they're not quite all ready to make it into a hard decision-making criteria. But that number is already growing from 2022 to 23, and also the sophistication of what is expected to be provided by suppliers is growing for those customers that have decided to pursue this path. The interesting statistic that I can share with you guys is that the actual participating hotels that have been compliant against the requirements of the corporations that pushed for sustainability related reports in the procurement exercise, they in 2022 have had higher adoption globally in corporate programs at the level of 17% across the globe for our organization. And in the US alone, it was at almost 30, so 29% for the USA. That is a clear sign of that it's worth, from a supply perspective, to actively engage in this pursuit, because your chances of getting through into a prominent place on a hotel program, preferred hotel program, are increasing tremendously.
Excellent. Well, I thank you all for a great recap of 2023. As we start to close today's podcast, wondering if you could share with those buyers listening any sort of quick tips or recommendations as we start to think about the year ahead. And certainly it will be time for the next sourcing season sooner than any of us would like to enter that. So we'll do a quick round of any quick recommendations to wrap up. Pauline, we'll start with you, if that's okay.
I would say be smart and watch your data and accept to be flexible and accept the change. So monitoring is the only way to drive your goals, whatever your goals are: sustainability, cost, travelers, satisfaction, etc. Define KPIs and make sure that you measure on a regular basis. That's the only thing I would say.
Thanks, Pauline. David?
If I could borrow a lyric from Fleetwood Mac, "Don't stop thinking about tomorrow." This has been the biggest interruption to our industry in the history of it, at least in the near term. I think we really need to take advantage of all the innovation, the technology, the new ways of thinking, and really move forward in a way that's, certainly partner oriented between buyers and suppliers, but certainly, using all the information that's available to us and the technology to improve the way we do business.
And Lukasz?
Right. So to all of the buyers out there, my recommendation would be around embracing convergence. Use your full buying power across all verticals of your business to help you drive compliance and control, and to help you drive the costs down overall, and land on a supplier selection that will be more in tune with your intention for the hotel accommodation program. And second point, don't be afraid of dynamic program management. Let's not wait an entire year to be able to drive precious change. If it needs to be done from 1 month or week to another, let's embrace it together as part of the industry innovation moving forward.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's certainly still a dynamic environment out there, and certainly recommend that idea of continuous management of the program, and not waiting for this big exercise as we head into the later part of this year. As we wrap up, I'd first like to thank our wonderful panelists for such an engaging discussion. I really appreciate you spending this time together to recap the sourcing season that we've just exited. To our listeners, you've been listening to The Business of Travel, the official podcast of the Global Business Travel Association. For more information about GBTA and its important work, visit gbta.org, and be sure to rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be releasing the third podcast in this hotel RFP series later this spring. Until next time, thanks so much for listening.